on outreach, and we started reading some readings from this little booklet, 1 Minute Witness by Monty Celine, and today's reading is called Compassion. How do you begin to witness to people who are not interested in being witnessed to? How do we begin to share Christ with a large number of Americans who believe that religion is personal? It's impolite to bring up the topic. In fact, what you do is more powerful than what you say. Everyone knows there's between what people say and what they actually do. We call that distance hypocrisy. Not only did Jesus have some hard things to say about hypocrisy, such as in Matthew 6, but today's research shows that one of the key reasons the average American is turned off by the whole idea of going to church is because he sees hypocrisy among churchgoers. They say it's all about God's love and mercy, one non-believer told me, but when you go to church, there's too many rules and people are cold. You misunderstand if you think this is a visceral reaction. A woman with whom I have had many professional contacts over the years told me, I certainly believe there is a God, but I simply cannot get over the basic hypocrisy of organized religion. How can they spend all that money to worship God 1 hour a week while all around them are so many suffering people? Surveys indicate that 4 of 5 Americans agree with this woman. They do not take seriously any religion that is not visibly engaged in social work. Colleagues of mine a couple of years ago produced a video about how to be a caring church. They hired some professional actors from the secular marketplace. At the end of the project, one of the actors said, I'm not religious, but if there were a church like this, I would join. Do you walk your talk at the place where you work or in the neighborhood where you live? Do you act out the love of God in meaningful ways that can easily be seen by those who work or live near you? This is an essential element in witnessing. Ellen White writes that Jesus showed sympathy as an early step in reaching people. If you daily demonstrate compassion in practical ways, you are making a statement about the God who loves the lost so much that God died for them. This nonverbal prepares the listener for what you may later say about faith. It's not random acts of kindness, but consistent caring that demonstrates a truly Christ-like approach to life. The hallmark of authenticity is a person who regularly gives time, money, and energy to feed the hungry, house the homeless, care for the poor, heal the sick, speak up for the oppressed. Does your life demonstrate genuine humanitarian concern? We open our Bibles to Proverbs chapter 31. Mother's Day weekend. We're going to talk about mothers some today. So, Proverbs chapter 31. We're going to begin at verse 23. Proverbs 31, beginning with verse 23. Her husband is known in the gates, when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies sashes for the merchants. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. She watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. So there we have the part of the description of the Proverbs 31 woman. So we see portrayed there the devotion that she has to her family, that she takes care of them, that she gives them good advice. She has wisdom in her mouth. And so, mothers are such an important thing to society that, we all have one. At some point, we got here some way. We were all born, so we all have a mother, or we've all had a mother. And mothers can really steer the course of which way people choose to go in society. The book Adventist homepage 243, it says that the day of God will reveal how much the world owes to godly mothers, for men who have been unflinching advocates of truth and reform. Men who have been bold to do and dare, who have stood unshaken amid trials and temptations, men who chose the high and holy interests of truth and the glory of God before worldly honor or life itself. Mothers, awake to the fact that your influence and example are affecting the character and destiny of your children. In view of your responsibility, develop a well-balanced mind and a pure character, reflecting only the true, the good, and the beautiful. So in 1865, when I printed this, it didn't print the author's name of the poem, but anyway, the poem "The Hand That Rocks the Cradle" was written. I want to share that with you. Blessings on the hand of woman. Angels guard its strength and grace in the palace, cottage, hovel. Oh, no matter where the place. Would that never storms assailed it, rainbows ever gently curled. For the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. Infancy's the tender fountain, power may with beauty flow. Mothers first to guide the streamlets, from them souls unresting grow. Grow on for good or evil, sunshine streamed or evil hurled, for the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. Woman, how divine your mission, here upon our natal sod. Keep, oh, keep the young heart open, always to the breath of God. All true trophies of the ages are from mother love impearled. For the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. Blessing on the hand of women, fathers, sons, and daughters cry, and the sacred song is mingled with the worship in the sky. Mingles there, no tempest darkens, rainbows evermore are hurled, for the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. So it's really, I think, impossible to overestimate the effect that mothers can have upon their children. That, generally speaking, fathers are away much of the day working and stuff, and so the mothers spend a lot more time, especially with the younger children, and the fathers. And it's during those youngest formative years that the course of life is often being set for children. So what an awesome privilege and responsibility that we have, that mothers have. This is also from Adventist homepage 242. Especially does responsibility rest upon the mother, she by whose lifeblood the child is nourished and its physical frame is built up, imparts to it also mental and spiritual influences that tend to the shaping of mind and character. It was Jochebed, the Hebrew mother, who, strong in faith, was not afraid of the king's commandment, of whom was born Moses, the deliverer of Israel. It was Hannah, the woman of prayer and self-sacrifice and heavenly inspiration, who gave birth to Samuel, the heaven-instructed child, the incorruptible judge, the founder of Israel's sacred schools. It was Elizabeth, the kinswoman and kindred spirit of Mary of Nazareth, who was the mother of the Savior's herald. And I'd already kind of picked which mothers I wanted to look at. Two of them were mentioned in that one, and the third one, obliquely, instead of Elizabeth, we're going to be looking at Mary as the third mother. We're going to start by looking at Moses' mother. So let's open our Bibles now to Exodus chapter 2. Exodus chapter 2, and we'll be beginning with the first verse. And a man of the house of Levi went and took as wife a daughter of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son. When she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, She took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, and put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maids to get it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." And so the maiden went and called the child's mother. And then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, "Because I drew him out of the water." It's interesting, this first passage that introduces us to Moses, his mother isn't even named there. No, neither is his father, for that matter. But if we turn over to Exodus chapter 6, we find their names are mentioned. Exodus chapter 6, and we'll look at verse 20. Now Amram took for himself Jochebed, his father's sister, his wife, and she bore him Aaron and Moses. And the years of life of Amram were 137 years. So Jochebed is the mother of Moses. That this command had gone out from Pharaoh that all of the Hebrew baby boys are to be thrown into the river and drowned, because the Hebrews kept growing in numbers and in strength. And so they tried to work them harder. They just grew that much stronger. So finally, this draconian measure is put in place that we're going to, cut back on the number of the males. And so every baby boy that's born now is going to have to be thrown into the Nile River. But Moses' mother refused to do that. In fact, if we go to Hebrews chapter 11, it also talks about this. Hebrews 11, beginning with verse 23. By faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents, because they saw he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's command. So even though the command was there, they refused to carry it out. And so she had a plan. We're going to put him in this little basket of bulrushes. And so we're going to put him in the river, but we're going to put him in this little basket in the reeds, so he's not going to float off down the river. He's not going to drown. And then sister was left there to watch after him. And, God works miracles. And so it's Pharaoh's daughter that finds the baby. If any other, Egyptian had found the baby, probably would have just taken and dumped him into the river because of the command. But Pharaoh's daughter is Pharaoh's daughter, and so, she can kind of do what she wants. And so she's like, she has compassion on this baby. And so she's, wants to keep it, but, and so immediately Moses' sister, thinking quickly, "Would you want me to find a nurse for the baby?" "Yes, that sounds like a good idea. Go find a nurse." And so she goes and brings her mother. Moses' own mother is now hired to raise him. She becomes his nurse. So, she who was a slave now is actually getting paid to raise her own baby boy, even though most of the baby boys have been ordered to be executed. And so she nurses him and she raises him until he's an appropriate age, and then sends him to live in the palace with Pharaoh's daughter. Let's keep reading here in Hebrews. By faith Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. So we find that Moses He had the experience of being raised by his mother, and that in the book Education on page 61, it says this about that experience. Younger than Joseph or Daniel was Moses, removed from the shelter and care of his childhood home. Yet already the same agencies that shaped their lives had molded his. Only 12 years did he spend with his Hebrew kindred, but during those years was laid the foundation of his greatness. It was laid by the hand of one little known to fame. Jochebed was a woman and a slave. Her lot in life was humble, her burden heavy. But through no other woman save Mary of Nazareth has the world received greater blessings. Knowing that her child must soon pass beyond her care to the guardianship of those who knew not God, she the more earnestly endeavored to link his soul with heaven. She sought to implant in his heart love and loyalty to God, and faithfully was the work accomplished. Those principles of truth were the burden of his mother's teaching and the lessons of her life. No after influence could induce Moses to renounce. And so he grew up amongst the slaves as a Hebrew, but then he goes to the Egyptian court. And Egypt at that time was the premier empire of the world. You know, they had the education, they had the wealth and things that were there. And so he would receive the best training in all sorts of things. The young, future pharaohs, the young princes of Egypt, they were taught about warfare, they were taught about mathematics and geometry and all these different fields of study he learned. So Moses learned all of those things. Also, they were instructed in the worship of the Egyptian gods. And so as Moses is growing, he has to make a decision. If he chooses to go along and start worshiping the Egyptian gods, he could have become Pharaoh. He could have become a virtual god on earth. The pharaohs were kind of distinct compared to a lot of the other, kings in the kingdom. So like in Mesopotamia and, Babylon and areas, the king was just seen as God's representative. And so they had written law codes and things. In Egypt, they didn't have written law codes because whatever the Pharaoh said, that's what the law was. And so he changed his mind. It was not like the Medes and the Persians, where once the king signed the law, even he had to obey it. Pharaoh was a god, and he could do what he pleased. That was the possibilities. Wealth, influence, power were at Moses' feet. He could have taken those. But he chose to keep his lot with the downtrodden people of God, the enslaved Hebrew people. Is who he sided with. And it was the influence of his mother. So she took those years that she had to raise him until he had to go to Pharaoh's daughter, and she wanted to make sure that he knew God, that he knew the truths, and that they were so foundational to him that he would not choose to give them up, and he didn't. And so we can thank Jochebed for the influence that she had upon her son Moses. Let's now go to 1 Samuel chapter 1. 1 Samuel chapter 1. Beginning with verse 1. Now there was a certain man of Ramathim, Zophim, of the mountains of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, of the son of Joram, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. And he had two wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. This man went up from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Also the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. And whenever the time came for Elkanah to make an offering, he would give a portion to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival also provoked her severely, making her miserable, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it was year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, that she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. Then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? And why is your heart grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? So Hannah rose after they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the tabernacle of the Lord. And she was in bitterness of soul and prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. Then she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant, remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. And so as she's sitting there praying, Eli can't hear her. He just sees her lips moving. He thinks, she's come for the feast, so he thinks she's drunk. And so he goes and he confronts her there and says, no, I'm not drinking. I'm pouring out my soul before the Lord. In verse 16, do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman, but for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief I have spoken until now. Then Eli answered her and said, go in peace. And the God of Israel grant your petition which you have asked him. And she said, let your maidservant find favor in your sight. So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Then they rose up early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord, and returned and came to their house at Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah, his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So it came to pass in the process of time that Hannah conceived and bore a son, and called his name Samuel, saying, because I have asked for him from the Lord. Now the man Elkanah and all the house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, not until the child is weaned, then I will take him, and he may appear before the Lord and remain there forever. So Elkanah, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only let the Lord establish his word. Then the woman stayed and nursed her son until she had weaned him. Now when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, with 3 bowls, 1 ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young. They slaughtered a bull and brought the child to Eli, and she said, O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood by you here praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition, which I asked of him. Therefore I also have linked him to the Lord as long as he lives. He shall be linked to the Lord. So they worshiped the Lord there. Then going to chapter 2, and we're going to pick up at verse 18. But Samuel ministered before the Lord, even as a child, wearing a linen ephod. Moreover, his mother used to make him a little robe and bring it to him year by year when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. And Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, the Lord give you descendants from this woman for the loan that was given to the Lord, and they would go to their own home. The Lord visited Hannah so that she conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. Meanwhile, the child Samuel grew before the Lord. So here we have Hannah, desperate to have a child. And many women in today's society can somewhat grasp that, but in her society, it was almost paramount. If you were a woman and didn't have children, you were nothing. Now, she wasn't nothing to her husband, and he wasn't mad and says, hey, I'm worth more than so many sons. He loved her. But she longed for a child. And so she goes and she prays. She says, Lord, give me a male son, and I will give him back to you. And she did just, God blessed her, and she did. And so she raised him for the first few years, and then when he was old enough, she took him to go live at the tabernacle and left him there. Then she'd only see him once a year. She'd make a little robe and bring it up to him. But then God continued to bless her, and she had 3 more sons and 2 daughters. But the influence of Samuel, we don't have time to read everything, but Eli the high priest, his sons were wicked. And that after, eventually they were slain, and they took the ark out to lead into battle against the Philistines. The ark is captured. Eli gets the news and he falls over backward dead and breaks his neck and dies. But Samuel was faithful. Here, this is from Child Guidance, page 197. Opportunities of inestimable worth, interests, infinite precious, are committed to every mother. During the first 3 years of the life of Samuel the prophet, his mother carefully taught him to distinguish between good and evil. Like every familiar object surrounding him, she sought to lead his thoughts up to the Creator. In fulfillment of her vow to give her son to the Lord, with great self-denial, she placed him under the care of Eli the high priest to be trained for service in the house of God. His early training led him to choose to maintain his Christian integrity. What a reward was Hannah's, and what an encouragement to faithfulness is her example. So Eli didn't do good at raising kids. Like I say, his 2 boys became wicked. But Samuel's early training by his mother put him in a place where he didn't follow in the path of Eli's sons. He remained loyal to God. He had learned to distinguish between good and evil. And so he went on to, be a judge over Israel and a prophet, and finally the one that God used to pick a king, or 2 kings actually, when Israel demanded a king. First he went and anointed Saul, and then when Saul turned out to be a big disappointment, he was led to David, who God entered into a covenant with. We've been studying covenants in our Sabbath school classes. But Samuel's life of faithfulness came from the upbringing his mother had given him during those first few years before he went to live at the tabernacle with the priests there. And so we can, again, just as Moses made such a profound impact, leading the children of Israel out of captivity in Egypt, Samuel was guiding them when they were in conflict with the Philistines, and through the transition from a theocracy to a kingdom, when they said, Samuel felt, hey, you're rejecting me. And God said, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me when they want a king. So if they want a king, they can have a king. Tell them what they're going to get. They've already been warned back in Deuteronomy and stuff. When the time comes to get a king, this is what he's going to do. And Samuel kind of reiterated that. He's going to raise your taxes. He's going to take your daughters to be, and to live with him. He's going to take your young sons for the armies and things. And so all this is going to happen. But if you want a king like the nations around you, then you can have a king. Because he led through these transitional periods in Israel. And so it had I think a profound impact upon David. So we can be very thankful to Hannah for the upbringing and her willingness to make that sacrifice of giving him to the Lord. Let's go to Matthew chapter 1. Let's read a few verses here in Matthew chapter 1, then we're going to go and look at what Luke has to say about some things here with Mary. Matthew chapter 1, beginning with verse 18. Now the birth of Jesus Christ was as follows. After his mother Mary was betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found with child of the Holy Spirit. Then Joseph, her husband, being a just man and not wanting to make her a public example, was minded to put her away secretly. But when he thought about these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take to you Mary, your wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. And she will bring forth a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. So all this was done that it might be fulfilled, was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, Behold, the virgin shall be with child and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which is translated God with us. Then Joseph, being aroused from sleep, did as the angel of the Lord commanded, and took to him his wife, and did not know her till she had brought forth her firstborn son, and he called his name Jesus. Let's go down to Luke chapter 1. Luke chapter 1, and we're going to begin at verse 26. Now in the 6th month, so this is talking about, starting off the story of John the Baptist and how Elizabeth gets pregnant in her old age with John the Baptist. So that's the 6th month of her pregnancy. Now in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David. And the virgin's name was Mary. And having come in, the angel said to her, "Rejoice, highly favored one, the Lord is with you, blessed are you among women." But when she saw him, she was troubled at his saying, and considered what manner of greeting this was. The angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And behold, you will conceive in your womb, and bring forth a son, and shall call his name Jesus. He will be great, and will be called the Son of the Highest. And the Lord will give him the throne of his father David. And he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end." Then Mary said to the angel, "How can this be, since I do not know a man?" And the angel answered and said to her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the highest will overshadow you. Therefore also that Holy One who is born of you will be called the Son of God. Now indeed Elizabeth your relative has also conceived a son in her old age, and this is now the 6th month for her, who was called barren. For with God nothing will be impossible." Then Mary said, "Behold, the maidservant of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word." And the angel departed from her. So, again, we see Mary's willingness to become the way for Jesus to enter into the world. And again, in her culture especially, we see that portrayed in Matthew. It's a version of it, of Joseph's reaction. Joseph hears, he's like, they're engaged, but engagement then was more like a marriage phase 1. It's more than what an engagement for us is. So they are already considered married, but they haven't had the ceremony. They're not actually married, fully married yet. But she finds out, you're what? You're pregnant. Well, what's he to think? Well, she's been with some other guy. He knows how women get pregnant. She had to be with some other guy. And, so that's what Mary was willing to go through, to, have, sort of an out-of-wedlock birth is what we would call it today. That's what it would look like to everyone else, that she'd been running around with some guy and gotten pregnant. But she was willing to endure that. I mean, in today's society, we're reaching a place where that's really almost no big deal anymore, unfortunately. That's a whole other sermon. But in her culture, you could get stoned for stuff like that. And although by her day, usually wasn't put to death, but you were put away, you were divorced, you were put away. So that's what Joseph was ready to do. And he said he's going to do it quietly. He didn't want to cause her to be embarrassed, but he loved her. But yet, if she was not faithful, he couldn't say it. And then the angel sent to tell him, "Hey, this is from God. Don't be afraid to go ahead and take her as your wife." And so he does so. But Mary was willing to, look like an evil woman, because she trusted God, and she was willing to be the one through whom the Messiah would be brought into the world. And of course, let's go over to Luke chapter 2. And we'll begin at verse 1. "It came to pass in those days that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This census took place while Quirinius was governing Syria. So all went to be registered, everyone to his own city. Joseph went up from Galilee, out of the city of Nazareth, into Judea, to the city of David, which was called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed wife, who was with child. So it was that while they were there, their days were completed for her to be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. Dropping down to verse 19. But talking about, we're skipping over the part about the shepherds coming and them talking about the angels, having sung and so on. But Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart. Then down to verse 21. And when 8 days were completed for the circumcision of the child, his name was called Jesus, the name being given by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. And then down to verse 25, they take him to be presented at the temple. And while they're there at the temple, they meet Simeon. And behold, there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon. And this man was just and devout, waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit was upon him. And it had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ. So he came by the Spirit into the temple. When the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him according to the custom of the law, he took him up in his arms and blessed God and said, Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared before the face of all peoples, a light to bring revelation to the Gentiles, the glory of your people Israel. And Joseph and his mother marveled at those things which were spoken of him. Then Simeon blessed them and said to Mary, his mother, Behold, this child is destined for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign which shall be spoken against. Yes, a sword will pierce through your own soul also, that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed. Now there was one Anna, a prophetess, the daughter of Phanuel of the tribe of Asher. She was of great age, and had lived with a husband 7 years from her virginity, and this woman was a widow of about 84 years, who did not depart from the temple, but served God with fasting and prayers night and day. And coming in the instant, she gave thanks to the Lord and spoke of him to all those who looked for redemption in Jerusalem. So when they had performed all the things according to the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, their own city, Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. So he begins to grow. He's under the care of his parents. Of course, Joseph is a carpenter. He's working a lot. So especially in those younger years, it's Mary who's teaching him at home there. That, it's hard for our minds to completely grasp the fact that here, he who had basically written what the Bible has written, the Old Testament, now has to learn it, because he comes in this world as a human baby. And so as he grows, he learns. And so Mary, teaches him things from the scriptures. She teaches him lessons from nature. She, is preparing him for this destiny that he has. And so when he gets to be 12, they take a journey to the temple. They're traveling with a bunch of neighbors and friends and family, and so they all head back, and they think, well, he's with one of the cousins or something, and they get a day or so up the road, and well, where's Jesus? So back they go, and they find him in the temple, and he's discussing deep spiritual things with the learned men of Judaism, and they're astounded by how can this man? They could tell he hadn't been gone to the schools of the rabbis. He'd been taught by his mother, and yet astounded them. And so they go back and they find him, they bring him back. Verse 51, Then he went with them and came to Nazareth and was subject to them. But his mother kept all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. So, again, Mary had a lot to do with molding the early character formation of Jesus as a baby, as he's beginning to learn about what his destiny is. And she's working at keeping him connected with God. Desire of Ages, page 70, says, the child Jesus did not receive instruction in the synagogue schools. His mother was his first human teacher. From her lips and from the scrolls of the prophets, he learned of heavenly things. The very words which he himself had spoken to Moses for Israel, he was now taught at his mother's knee. As he advanced from childhood to youth, he did not seek the schools of the rabbis. He needed not the education to be obtained from such sources, for God was his instructor. And so the influence of Mary that we see, and several times as she pondered these things in her heart. She didn't fully grasp everything. She didn't fully understand, his ministry any more than the disciples did. They thought, he's the Messiah, he's here, he's going to, overthrow the Romans and set up God's kingdom and stuff. And I'm sure she was thinking that too, that she understood that he was the Messiah. She understood what had happened to her. But this early upbringing that she gave him set the foundation for Jesus. And again, because he had to grow and develop just like any other human child has to do so. He didn't get some magical power just because he was God. The Bible tells us that he laid aside, those attributes that he had as God to come down here to live as a human being so he could be our perfect example. And so Mary gave him that best of training. And so we see here with Moses, with Samuel, and of course with Jesus, the influence of a Christian mother, of the influence that mothers can have upon their children. And so, like we're told in the book of Proverbs, that we think of our mothers, we should rise up and call them blessed for all that they have done for us throughout the years, helping us to become the people that we are. Let's open our hymnals now to hymn number 655, 655.